Alright, Chapter 12, Video number 2. With Kitty. Polly followed him back down the stairs. The last daylight was fading. Through the dust-caked windows of the downstairs hall she could see the streetlights turning on. "I ought to kick your ass for hanging around with Charlie," McGraw said. "You got more brains than that, Polly." Again, Polly wondered at herself. She couldn't explain. She didn't try. "I'll drive you home," the police chief said to her. "I don't want to go home," Polly answered. "Those kids are my friends." She hesitated, fighting down an impulse to start crying. "Please, McGraw, let me help." McGraw nodded. "Okay," he said. "You're a class act when you get your head screwed on, right, Polly? Use your sense and stay away from Charlie. Now come on, let's get out of here." Mrs. Tally parked her car on Main Street near the Stonehaven House Hotel. As she got out, she saw Polly and McGraw coming down the steps. Polly was holding her shirt together where the top 2 buttons were missing. Her hair was disheveled, and perspiration still gleamed on her round face. She stopped when she saw Mrs. Tally. "If you're staying in town, there's a spare shirt in my locker," McGraw said to Polly. "Okay," Polly said. She was looking at the expression on Mrs. Tally's face. McGraw tipped his cap and walked down toward the police station in the deepening dusk. Mrs. Tally didn't acknowledge him. Her eyes moved from Polly's hair to the hand that held her shirt together. She looked into Polly's face. "Did you go into that place with Mr. McGraw?" she demanded. "No," Polly answered. She was starting to get angry again. "Mr. McGraw found you in there?" Mrs. Tally snapped. "That's right," Polly answered coldly. Mrs. Tally turned and walked away. Her back and her grip on her handbag expressed the outrage that Polly had once wanted to provoke. Charlie Phoebe stood in the back of the crowded police station. His imagination was full of reward money, jewels, and murder. McGraw stood down in front, looming over everybody else. He ran his finger across a geodetic survey map pinned to the wall. "Lee, you take your guys south, along here. Don't forget the empty houses on Massasoit Road. You've got the granite quarry. Take some rope and a grappling hook." Ellen Drake stifled a cry. She and Richard were sitting together against the wall. McGraw's finger swept across the map and stopped on the wooded point sticking out diagonally into the bay. "Mac, this whole area is yours. Don't forget the cliff up on Rawlings Meadow. Mrs. Drake tells me the kids sometimes go there." Memory. For a fleeting moment Richard's mind brightened with the memory of the blustery Sunday afternoon he and his wife had walked up the meadow, hand in hand. Pretty soon we'll be a real family," she had said happily. 6 days later, Bentley was born, and she was dead. The screen door next to Charlie slammed. Dick Amberstam, McGraw's second deputy, took off his cap and wiped his forehead on his sleeve. McGraw looked over the heads of the men crowding the room. "Anything on Willie Bill?" "His pickup's gone," Dick said. "Ellie Natcher says she saw him in the parking lot of the roadhouse. She saw him leave." Which direction?" McGraw asked. "West," Dick answered. "It was long about sunset," she said. Polly was standing against the wall. She glanced across the room. Mrs. Tally's face looked like a mask of ice. McGraw turned back to the map. "Well, I'll take everything west of here," he said, pointing to the area between the village and the rise of the uplands. "That's all woods. Most likely they went there." He glanced at Richard and Ellen. "Now we're in pretty good shape. The Coast Guard's got a description of them. The state police are sending in a helicopter soon as it gets light. And they've put out a bulletin on Willie Bill. Remember, the girl's wearing a striped t-shirt, shorts, and sneakers. She's blonde and about yay tall. She can make noises, but she can't talk. Bentley's wearing a blue sports shirt. You all know him." "Thanks for coming out," McGraw said. "I know the kid's parents." A chair scraped as Ellen stood up. Charlie could just see the shine of her hair in the overhead light. "My former husband," he heard her say in a voice that trembled. "Sally's father. I've talked to him on the phone, of course. He has asked me to say that we'll pay a reward of $5,000 to anybody who finds our daughter." There was an embarrassed silence. "All right," McGraw said quietly. "Let's get to it. Mike comes with me. Dick'll take over at the station house. Phone in to him every 2 hours. Our daughter, Richard thought bitterly, as he and Ellen followed the crowd of men out into the humid evening. She hadn't said a word about Bentley, whom she professed to love. Richard felt the new web of intimacy between him and Ellen fraying under the stress of the day's terrible events. McGraw walked out onto Main Street. Men were throwing gear into pickup trucks and cars. The roar of starting engines filled the street. The situation was too familiar to McGraw. Willie Bill was a total puzzle, but he could be just the type. The men around the police chief on the street and sidewalk were hard-bodied locals, lobstermen and scallopers, packers from the freezing plant, machinists and farmers. They'd done things like this before. They wouldn't be unnerved if they found 2 ravaged little bodies. They wouldn't try to lynch Willie Bill either. If he was somewhere out in the empty country, they'd find him and bring him in. And yet, McGraw's sense of foreboding was greater than the components of a potentially grisly tragedy warranted. Charlie Phoebe walked over to him, carrying a shotgun. "What are you doing with that?" McGraw demanded. "I'm not going out there without it," Charlie said. "Like you say, I know the country." McGraw was silent for a moment. "All right, but you're riding with me." He turned to Polly. "If you want to do something, stay at the station with Dick. He may need an errand run." "Sure," she said. She looked past McGraw. Mrs. Talley had stopped on the sidewalk and was glaring at her. Polly's indignation rose again. She patted Charlie on the shoulder. "See you when you get back, honey," she said. She turned and went into the police station. McGraw crossed the street. Richard and Ellen were getting into their car. "All right, folks," McGraw said. "You go home and sit tight until you hear from me." He saw the expression on Ellen's face as the headlights of a car swept over her. He reached in and squeezed her shoulder. "We'll find 'em. They're just stuck up a tree somewhere. Don't worry about Sally, Mrs. Drake. She's with Bentley, and he's some smart little kid." He watched them drive off into the darkness. Maybe, he thought, it's because they're living together without being married. Something, sure as hell, was all wrong. Charlie was standing on the street behind him. "Smart little kid my ass," he said. "You're sucking up to him so that he'll tell you where the stuff's hid in my hotel." "Shut your damn mouth, Charlie," McGraw said, "and get in that cruiser." He led the motorcade out of town, with Mike, his first deputy, driving the police car directly behind him. McGraw turned left on the dark highway. It seemed to him that the day had been 1,000 years long. The discovery of the German girl's body that morning had been rendered into a remote event by the disappearance of the 2 children. And just before that report came in, the news on the radio had been enough to make a man wonder if he lived far enough from where the nuclear fireballs would hit if the 2 world leaders didn't stop their new round of quarreling and accusation. McGraw felt that a putrid fury was boiling inside of Charlie Phoebe. Where are we at? Okay. A half-burned stick tumbled into the heap of glowing coals, and sparks rose. Bentley watched them extinguish, one by one, against the bed of cold starlight. He looked back across the fire at Slally. "Okay," he said resignedly. "We have to get to Indian Hill and find the stone before anybody catches us." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I still think you ought to go home when it gets light. Your mother's going to be mad as stink at us for staying out all night." Slally nodded. In the deep tangle of the forest, an owl made its throaty trill. The night's hunting was about to begin. Beyond the owl, on a dirt road banked by tall black walls of growth, Charlie Phoebe's eyes gleamed in the lights of the dashboard. "Stop," he said. McGraw braked the cruiser to a halt. Charlie opened the door and got out. He folded his arms on the smooth roof of the police car and listened. He heard the owl. He sniffed. A light breeze carried another faint whiff of the smoke Charlie had smelled in the car. He opened the back door and pulled out his shotgun. "Wait here," he said. "Hold it," McGraw said, leaning with one arm across the seat back. "Where do you think you're going?" "Place I know up the road we just passed," Charlie answered. His narrow face gave no sign of the murderous excitement that flared in him. "We'll drive in," McGraw said. "Deep ruts," Charlie said. "You'd get hung up. I remember a place back there a couple of kids might crawl into." "What do you need the shotgun for?" McGraw asked, not taking his eyes from Charlie's eyes. "Saw a moose cow and calf up there 2 summers ago," Charlie answered. "I'm not walking around without protection. If you're smart, you'll do the same. Give me a light. Won't be but a moment." McGraw handed him a long flashlight. Charlie trudged back to the left fork. He walked up the branch road. He breathed Ombra's poison on the close night air. The visions of Jules were coming clearer in his mind, but now he knew that he had to earn the fulfillment of his dreams. He had to kill Bentley Ellicott first. He broke the shotgun as he walked and flicked on the flashlight to check the 2 brass-butted shells in the chamber. "I don't know what'll happen first when I get the stone back," Bentley said. "I guess Dr. Christine—" Slally wasn't looking at him. The firelight glowed on her face as she stared past Bentley. Her mouth was slightly open, her fists closed slowly. "Stand up," whispered the voice of Charlie Phoebe. Bentley jerked around and swallowed a yell of fright. Slally scrambled to her feet and sidled halfway around the fire. "Now you," Charlie snapped at Bentley, gesturing with the shotgun. Bentley got up and moved to the middle of the road. "How come you're holding a shotgun on us?" he asked. He was trembling all over. In Charlie's demented mind, the reason the good life had always eluded him stood before him. His realization that Bentley had put a curse on him was so immense and simple that it didn't need explaining. Bentley stared at Charlie. Bentley didn't know if his hawks were in the sky anymore. He wasn't even sure he still had his magic. He was so scared he couldn't remember the incantation of the horseshoe crabs. He knew that Charlie was really going to shoot. "Hey, listen," he said loudly. "Listen, Mr. Phoebe." Charlie yanked the shotgun up to his shoulder and aimed the barrels directly at Bentley's eyes. He flicked off the safety catch. Suddenly Bentley's stomach clamped tight and he bent his body, trying to duck. Slally streaked past him and jumped, grabbing the shotgun barrel with both of her hands, swinging her body clear of the ground. She screamed at Bentley to run as he dashed for the bushes. He heard Charlie Phoebe roaring curses. He had nearly fallen into the fire. Bentley yelled for Slally to follow him. He fell over the bobcat's body and rolled among the ferns. The shotgun went off with an ear-cracking thunder. Pellets smashed into the granite wall a few feet above Bentley's head and ricocheted off in every direction. McGraw threw his cruiser into reverse and gunned the engine. He hit the brakes at the fork, dust billowing in the red taillights. He yanked the wheel to the left and put his foot on the accelerator, the siren howling. As he drove, he grabbed his radio microphone and shouted for help from the other cars searching the forest roads. He went around the bend on 2 wheels and saw the fire. Charlie was holding Slally by one arm. She was pummeling him with her free fist and screaming. McGraw slammed on the brakes and, opening his door, threw himself out on the car's momentum. He pulled his gun and stumbled into the beam of the headlights. "Let her go, Charlie," he bellowed, holding his revolver before him with both hands. Charlie let go of Slally, who was yelling, "Murderer!" and "Run, Bentley, run!" McGraw slid his gun back into its holster, stepped forward and put his arm around Slally's shoulders. "Okay, Charlie," he said. "What did you shoot at?" "I didn't shoot at a goddamn thing," Charlie barked. "The little bastard grabbed my shotgun and took a pop at me." Slally screamed that he was lying. And, let's see, McGraw looked down at her. Then he looked back at Charlie. "Sounds to me like she saw it another way." "She's a half-wit," Charlie yelled. "Listen to her. Blah, blah, blah." "Where's the boy?" McGraw asked quietly. Charlie pointed at the bushes by the granite wall. McGraw led Slally back to the cruiser and helped her into the front seat. The headlights of the other cars were jouncing up the dirt road. McGraw stood beside the closed front door of the driver's side. He switched on the cruiser's searchlight and played it across the bottom of the granite wall. The ferns and stones were like people staring in a flash photograph. McGraw tilted the light up. He swung it back and forth across the ledges, cracks, and crevices where saplings grew. McGraw told himself that an energetic kid in sneakers could go up that rock face like a monkey. He raised the searchlight higher. For an instant, he saw Bentley 40 feet up, looking at the fire, the people, the cars. Then the boy vanished. "Bentley!" McGraw called. "Bentley Ellicott, come on down here, kid!" He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted again. "It's Chief McGraw, Bentley. Nobody's going to hurt you." And I think maybe we better stop there.